You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. Firstly, before I move on, let me express my gratitude for all the subscribers and downloaders out there wherever you are. We took a look at some analytics and it was fantastic. And so again, thank you very much. Please stay with us. We're going to go, deeper and deeper into a lot of topics, broader and broader in some areas. But hopefully it will always be about inspiring change so that you can thrive. And yes, my work is mainly oriented towards men, but I also know that many women will benefit from what we're talking about, what I'm bringing to the table about living healthier and better than what we have before, because it's always upward and onward. Even if you're a Buddhist, the striving towards enlightenment is an ongoing process that we sometimes achieve, sometimes we don't, sometimes we come back to. But it's a work in progress. So again, thank you. All right, what about this week? Well, firstly, let me just recap a little bit from the last episode, which was essentially about love. Is love an emotion? What is it? And so I'm not going to go in depth about it, but for those of you who listened to my podcast and really took note, is that love in many respects is many things. So let me define it very succinctly. What I'm talking about at this point is not the love of children, the love of your dog, but the love of your partner. And again, in many respects, I have no, bias, whether it's heterosexual, homosexual, or in some other permutation. This is about loving as human beings in an intimately connected relationship. Okay? So one of the areas that I do get a lot of questions about and often have to work with quite a lot is that intersection between love and lust. We can call it desire or passion. But generally speaking, even when we talk and use that word intimacy, most of us tend to firstly think about physical intimacy, sex, right? So, and in a lot of ways, I think that we often need to go back and really define even that concept. So in this particular episode, what I want to do is lay a framework, as I always do, about what I think we need to look at and how to look at it, and then what to do with it, okay? Because we do, need to think about, thoughts, feelings, and action and how they interrelate with one another and what it creates when we put it together. This is not a reductionist exercise. This is not looking at the biochemistry of love or lust or desire or the brain function. This is bigger than that. Don't get me wrong. I want to reiterate that I'm not against reductionism. It's really important that we understand, the elements of something that we're looking at, whether that be in physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, anthropology. But ultimately, our biggest bang for our buck is going to come from seeing how the whole works. And my view always is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that includes individual human beings within groups. Okay, group dynamics is a fascinating process. Hence we have such interesting and dangerous experiences like riots, cults, rallies. Politicians have gotten very, very good over the centuries of riling up masses of people and getting them to think as one, when a lot of the stuff that they're actually putting out there is bullshit and dangerous and divisive. So let's come back to this idea of love. Okay, so in another podcast, I'm going to talk about the love of being, love of humanity, love of, right? But this is very, very much about me and my partner. Okay, and unfortunately, patriarchy has given us, some serious handbrakes. And I'm going to be talking to you guys out there at the moment. The idea that as a male, I am the protector of my partner. If you really seriously think about this, one of the things that you're going to pick up on, protector from whom? Well, generally speaking, from losing her romanticized virginal status, the purity of her, and secondly, from other males. So other males are immediately seen as competitors. Okay? And so what that generates frequently is a hypervigilance. So a lot of men in relationships are in a constant state of fight, flight, freeze in trying to cope with this relationship. Okay, so as I said before, in order to have a healthy relationship, you need to have a healthy relationship with yourself first. Point, take out. Okay, really focus on this. So let me create a broader framework. And I get requests from couples a lot, especially when they're in crisis, that somehow their physical relationship has diminished or has in fact fled the room. And so they want to know often, how do I, what do we need to do? How do I need to contribute to awakening that? And so I want to talk about fundamentally 4 levels of interaction, but they're not discrete. In a sense, think about this as a beautiful cake that you're putting together, or a lovely garden. All the elements need to come together in a sense and harmonize so that the energy is there. So a good relationship, a healthy relationship that's got the potential for a long life, requires that we as partners need to have a good friendship. Now, I know that in our romanticized idea of love, the kickoff usually is, that idea about lust, how does the other person look, So again, coming back to my perception as a male, is she attractive, physical proportions, and we all have different aspects of physicality that attracts us more than others. Okay, but ultimately that is not going to sustain a relationship, because within the first year, a lot of that needs to actually be revisited, and I'm going to come to that later. So friendship, really, really important. Common interests. How do you deal with different interests in the relationship? But it really is about creating your partner or a relationship with your partner that's like your best buddy. She should be the person that you're going to come to before anybody else to share things with, right? Even when there's crises in the relationship. Now, part of that friendship, love relationship, right, is a very important element that I think often in longer relationships get lost, and that is the idea of affection towards one another, okay? Now, what I'm going to say is you can't have a healthy sex life in your relationship that's perpetual if you don't have the founding of the friendship and the affection. Because if that's not there, you're lacking elements of trust and mutuality and respect, or potential respect. I can still respect my partner, but it's going to be different, am I going to be really focused on his or her needs Am I going to be empathic with his or her needs? And encouraging myself to communicate with my partner what I need in this. But affection begins to be part of the glue that holds us together. The other element that I talk a lot about, which is often at a very low key in a relationship, is the issue of sensuality. It's expressing sensualness with one another. Now, I'm not talking about the sort of sensuality of the, like the dim lights and, the bathtub with the candles. That could be part of it. But there's lots of different ways in which to be sensual. A soft touch, a brush of the cheek, running my hand over her hair or his hair. Again, let's not get caught up in gender here. This is, a mutual type of relating to one another that actually isn't defined by your sex or your gender. A lot of men still are inhibited when I work with them about showing affection and sensuality in public. Now, sensuality could be a bit tricky, okay, so we've got to put some boundaries around that. But definitely affection, you holding your partner's hand in public, do you kiss her on the cheek? Those sorts of things. And then ultimately, sex, the actual physical interaction between us. And there's lots of permutations on sex. It's not defined or confined to intercourse. Men are not there to dominate their partner sexually. That's dangerous stuff. It's a mutual interaction. It's like a dance. We come together. And there are times when he leads and then she leads. I know in dancing, the traditional, and this is patriarchal idea, was that he leads the partner through the dance. That doesn't need to be the case. I'm a shocking dancer. I've got 2 left feet, despite the fact that I play percussion. So my rhythm on the floor when I'm upright, standing, sort of stops at my waist. I'm a percussionist, not a drummer. And so, this frustrates my wife a lot. But, what I've tried to do whenever we've had the opportunity, and I think she's given up on me, to be honest, I tried to take the lead from her because she knows what she's doing. I don't. I'm clueless in that area. So, if we expect there to be passion, lust, or desire simply on the flick of a switch, we don't understand either ourselves or the other person. And men, you need to understand that your sexual arousal patterns are going to be different when you're, in your 40s and in your 50s and 60s as you get older. I work with a lot of men who somehow gotten the idea that, sex over 60 doesn't exist. It's getting better. We are getting better. But there is still some very traditional attitudes around this. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to think about is that the framework is like the frame around a tapestry through which we thread the various threads, like, being a friend, being able to listen, being able to share, levels of affection that go with that when we speak with each other. The affection. If I leave the house, I'm going to give my partner a kiss goodbye, check in with her what her schedule is in the morning. If I get to see her at lunchtime, I'm going to go home and I'm going to check in as a greeting, another kiss and another, how was your morning? Did you get what you wanted to do get done? All right? And then, as the day goes on and we sit down and we have, dinner and we share food and occasionally wine and we recline on the couch, is to snuggle, to be connected with each other physically. This doesn't require a massive amount of talking or a massive amount of time. But these little investments, and the Gottmans, and I will talk about this in the next episode, have a thing called 6 hours a week to a better relationship. And I looked at that material and it's exactly in line with my thinking. It is about, constructing the cake or nurturing a whole garden so that we can enjoy the pleasures of it. It takes some work. It requires investing some energy and some thought, especially as we get older. Libidos do change, but libido isn't the thing that really makes us a good partner. It is an element of it. It's one of those material threads running through the tapestry, if you want to use that, or it's that little special sauce in the dish. We do need to understand ourselves physiologically, physically, sexually better than what we often do. I mean, I still find it fascinating that we look at the statistics in heterosexual relationships. A lot of women actually don't have satisfying orgasms through their sexual relationship with their partner. They do significantly better masturbating. Now, call out to everybody. I think we need to get to know each other so well that we can create a cooperative, interactive way of pleasuring each other. Now, interestingly enough, when I look at it from the perspective of passion, lust, or desire, those things, as much as we think they're physical, actually have their point of origin in our mind. And so when people, and I get frustrated with this, particularly when scientists and sex researchers and medical people and a lot of psychologists talk about, women, it's more emotional, sex is more emotional. Well, actually, it's about the intellectual, the cognitive aspects that you bring to the table. If you don't ever think about sex or elements of sex or passion or lust or sensuality, it's really difficult to suddenly get turned on when your partner goes, "Hey, honey, are you ready for it?" Or the other way around. It's a nonsense. This reductionistic approach to understanding how this interrelationship works so that it becomes satisfying and that we thrive over time requires, mind and body. Mind kicks it off. Even 80-year-olds have erotic dreams. They have a sexual arousal. But a lot of that's often interfered with by practical things like, the body hurts at that age more than it doesn't. You might have mobility restrictions. And you've got the messaging from previous generations about old people don't have sex. Completely untrue. And I look at, aged care where they separate couples apart from each other, and I think that's criminal. In our final years of life, we should be together more, not less. It would make us healthier. We know that from introducing kids into aged care. Suddenly, everyone's a bit sprightlier. They're more connected, right? They get a joy about life that wasn't there when they're all sort of sitting in their chair, looking around and seeing the same aged faces reflected back that lack a spark. I want to be a 90-year-old who's still got a twinkle in his eye and enjoys, the liveliness of the world around me, even though I mightn't be able to participate in the same way. But I know that will keep me more alive in myself than not. We need to rethink the whole thing about how our community, in this sense, supports the whole relationship, the whole friendship, the coupling, the sensuality and sex within that context. And it is always based on being loving, being respectful, and being cooperative with one another, working things through. We've got to communicate effectively. And if we don't do that, it's like trying to play the piano with fingers missing. You're just not going to get the tune that you want. And if somewhere along the line one person decides that, well, that's all really cute, but I'm just not into him or her anymore, then have the courage to let your partner know before you outsource that with somebody else and create a civil separation that's not based on animosity and hate and vile behaviour. take ownership for how you deal with your partner, even when that relationship is declining and going into its demise. That has integrity. Anything else, that's not based on those principles of, we share 25 years together and then for some reason it just ain't working anymore. And it happens. I'm a realist. I know that this is the case. I've worked with too many couples. But it's better to acknowledge that, validate it, and then find alternatives. The kids are going to get a shock, but by this stage, most of them tend to be adults. If they're not, kids are smarter than what we think they are often, and if you explain it to them, it's fine. So let me come back before I finish. So think of the frame of a tapestry and the threads that go with it, or the recipe, right? It's all coming together, and it won't work well if there's lots of bits missing. So I hope that inspires you to think passionately, to look at your partner with a level of desire, but that desire is not just about them sexually, it's about who they are. And that will spark greater degrees of lust and passion. And it rolls on from there. And hopefully, this will lead you to have a relationship wherein both of you really are thriving and where, hopefully many of you can say, well, I am more in love with my partner now than when we first met. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. Until next time. Again, thank you very much. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in my work, you can go to my webpage, www.goodmengreat.com or www.gunterswoboda.com. And those of you who are looking for a great read as the holidays are coming up, check out my book, Mountains of the Sea, published by Winterwolf. It's a rollicking, great adventure story. And I'm told, essentially very, very visually written. So until next time, this is me going. See ya. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.